If you could only do one biceps exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be? My answer? The single arm dumbbell preacher curl. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything that you should know about the preacher curl that you don't. This will include everything from how to position your elbow perfectly to what incline you should be using and which incline is best. And then later on in the video, I'm going to tell you about whether or not I think that locking your elbow out in the exercise is actually bad, because I think the answer may surprise many of you. Before you even think about grabbing the dumbbell, you need to make sure that your arm is in the appropriate position. To do this, place the back of your arm against the top of the bench. Then start to curl without the dumbbell. You can feel free to place your arm so that the pad is touching your arm low towards the elbow, or a little bit higher up where you have your armpit kind of shoved down onto the top of the bench. Both are fine. So how do you make sure that your arm is in the right spot? Well, when you look at the curl from the front, your hand, elbow, and shoulder should all be starting and ending in a straight line at every single point in the range of motion. Now, if you're positioned so that your arm ends up angled like this, or even like this as you curl, even subtly, this can screw up the motion and make it uncomfortable. Now, before we talk about bench angle, there are two underrated aspects of the setup that I feel often aren't talked about enough. When you place the working arm down, I highly recommend placing the same side foot forward. This is so that you can use the floor to push yourself directly backward into the bench pad. And this will make it much easier to lock yourself into position when you have a load in your hand. Then place your non-working hand onto the bench, creating a subtle push forward. This will serve the exact same function as the legs do. Basically just secures your arm into the bench so that it's glued there. Okay, cool. So your arm is firmly anchored into the pad by the rest of your body, and your arm is perfectly aligned in that straight line setup that we talked about. What about bench angle? Here's a really simple way to think about this. The higher the bench angle, the harder the exercise will be toward the top in the squeeze position. And the lower the bench angle, the harder the exercise will be toward the stretch or elbow straighten position. So here's how we know this. The dumbbell is always heaviest, in other words, it applies the most amount of torque on your elbow when the forearm is parallel to the floor. This is no different from when you do a lateral raise and the dumbbell ends up heaviest when the arm is parallel to the floor. So take the two extremes of this. If the bench is set fully upright, the forearm is parallel to the floor toward the top of the motion. If the bench is set extremely low, the forearm is parallel to the floor at the bottom of the motion, or close to it. So again, if you want to bias more of that squeeze position, use a higher bench angle. If you want to bias more of the stretch position, use a lower bench angle. Most of the time, I personally prefer a sort of hybrid position around 70 or so degrees so that I can still load the bottom and the top appropriately. And when you end up setting it up this way, your final reps look something like this, where the weight is just moving incredibly slow because the challenge is appropriate for your biceps at every point in the range. Now, before I tell you about whether or not you should actually allow your elbow to fully straighten and lock, we need to cover just one major point when it comes to the actual execution and what you should be thinking about when you perform the curl, which is that instead of thinking about just curling upward toward the ceiling, you want to think about curling backward toward the shoulder. This is because the elbow moves in an arc, meaning that the hand actually moves backward toward the shoulder at the top. Beyond this, you probably don't need to think very much. Once you've locked in the setup, the execution is super straightforward. Just make sure you're moving slow and controlled through the whole motion. Okay, so is it bad to lock your elbow? Many people seem to worry about this a lot because of viral internet videos, but no, it's not inherently bad. Because beyond those viral videos online, we have no actual evidence to suggest that that position is more dangerous than any other. Plus, when you see these people hurting themselves on the preacher curl in that position, it's usually because they're moving way too fast with way too much load with way too little control. And here's the tricky part about thinking that locking your elbow out is bad. If you think it's bad, you'll probably avoid ever training the position. If you always avoid ever training the position, you're not gonna get stronger in that position. And eventually, if you ever find yourself accidentally loading into that position, you're gonna be under-prepared for it by definition. So what's the solution? Train it. And train it with care and slow progression, just like you would any other novel exercise or movement. If you are really worried about it though, or maybe you've had a history of pain in that position and you just like to start to slowly work your way toward that, that's totally fine. Just use a higher bench angle so that it's lighter at the bottom and heavier at the top, because this will unload the bottom, the elbow straightened position, and overload the top, the elbow bent position. And again, if you actually want to make that elbow straightened position more resilient, just lower lower the bench angle like we talked about earlier to train that more stretched position. Just use a much lighter weight than you probably think that you can and work into it slowly. Over time, when you get stronger at the lower angles and at the higher angles, you're gonna be really, really robust in terms of your elbow strength and all the muscles that bend the elbow. If you're still watching at this point in the video, please hit that subscribe button, like this video, and maybe share it with a friend. And if you wanna learn more from me, check the links in the description, and I'll see you all in the next one.